Rabbi,
I just realized we weren't recording, so I turned on the recording.
That was the trailer that you just gave us, right?
That was the what?
I said that was the trailer, the preview of what's to come.
Exactly. I'm not going to tell you what happens to the guy in the end, or maybe I'll make it a woman to be more egalitarian. A woman is running away from a tiger, and then she runs into this well, and there's a poisonous snake at the bottom. Okay, it would work just as well for a woman.
Just make it a hermaphrodite.
Oh my.
But modern and controversial.
But you can get away with mixing Buddhism and Judaism in a way you cannot get away mixing Christianity and Judaism. And the reasons for this are more historical than theological, although they're a little bit theological as well. So, because Jews have been persecuted so viciously by Christians that any mention of anything even remotely Christian gets Jews very, very upset. So, because in theory, you have Jesus who lived and died as a Jew. It's very clear, or it's pretty clear, that he was never a Christian. That he was always a Jew. And he was a part of one sect or another in Second Temple, just like the Essenes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. So he was part of a Jewish sect, which is like a pluralistic Jewish environment. So anything Jesus said is Jewish. Of course, we don't know what Jesus said because it's all in the New Testament that was written, 50 or 60 years after he died in a different language. So there's certain problems, but in theory, Jesus is kosher. But if I start quoting Jesus on Friday nights, somebody's going to go completely ballistic, so because of the emotional connection. But Buddhist, if I quote the Buddha, nobody's going to blink, because Buddhists, as far as we know, never persecuted Jews. And we were never really in direct competition. I mean, Buddhists don't see themselves in competition with any religion. So it's a much more potentially harmonious relationship. But I don't think Buddhists have this concept of a chosen people either. Okay, we can read on. Minya, do you want to read?
Is that where we are? Early rabbinic?
Yes. So up to now, Harvey Fields has spent 4 or 5 paragraphs basically opening up the question. Now he's going to start with what he calls early rabbinic commentators.
Early rabbinic commentators speak of the mystery of love between God and the people of Israel. God, they say, discovers the oppressed and beaten people in Egypt, liberates them, leads them through the desert, and gives them the Torah at Mount Sinai. God's love for Israel is eternal. It is a love of rescue and protection, a love of deep mutual affection and commitment. Quoting the Song of Songs as love poetry between God and Israel, the rabbis claim that God says of Israel, "My beloved is mine, and I am my beloved's." And the people of Israel respond, "God is our God, and we are God's people." This sense that God's mysterious and eternal love for Israel leads to being chosen as an segula is expressed by Moses, who tells the people that they are consecrated to God, who has selected them not because they were powerful or because they are numerous, but because God loves them. It is for that reason, Moses tells them, that God freed them from Egypt and made a covenant with them. The nature of love, whether between God and Israel or between human beings, cannot be explained. No one knows the secret of what attracts one person to another, or what sustains a relationship through years of sad and happy times, through celebrations, achievements, disagreements, and disappointments. If the capacity and power of human love remain a riddle, so does the mystery of the relationship between God and human beings. The origins of life, the sources of human curiosity, and the urge to create, care, seek justice, and love are all beyond explanation. We are more sure of our astonishment than our tentative theories. For many early rabbinic interpreters, God's choice of Israel as an Am Segula, God's liberation of Israel from Egypt, and Israel's exile and return to its land, could only be explained as an expression of such powerful and mysterious love.
Okay, thank you. So God and Israel are in a love affair. The Song of Songs is a love poem, probably written originally, talking about a man and a woman. And yet the rabbis include it in the Tanakh. And they reinterpret it to reflect, to say it's not about a man and a woman, it's an allegory or a metaphor for the love of God and Israel. So they really went into this metaphor, and this is not even going into the Kabbalistic aspect of it, where it gets even more explicit and in some cases sexual. But here it's just, in the standard rabbinic writings. Comments or responses?
No,
Minya.
I know there's no answer to what I'm going to say, but with all this talk about love between God and the Israel, between God and Israel and human beings, the idea that as long as we follow the commandments and do as God says, we will always be favored. If that's the case, does that mean that all the times through history, whether it was the Inquisition or the Holocaust, that the people were not following the commandments and were not doing what they thought they should be doing? And that's why God said, I'm not going to be, it's not my doing what happened in those two cases.
Good question.
There's a lot of ultra-Orthodox, maybe most of ultra-Orthodox that say yes. That's I think a standard ultra-Orthodox explanation.
That commandments were not followed.
And that's why in Israel today, they feel that they are totally, can I call you back? Or is it something real quick? Three. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry.
That God called you?
No, that was the Ultra-Orthodox Rabbinical Association of Jerusalem. They said, be careful what you say, going to get you. But I think most ultra-Orthodox would say, and this is going on in Israel now, they're telling their followers, we're the only true Jews. These other people are behaving very badly. They will bring catastrophe upon Israel. So we need to study Torah, and if we can get money from the government to do it, this is not a legitimate Jewish government, and we're going to save the country. So what we see as destroying the country, they see as saving the country, because the only thing that can save Israel is God, and God is only going to save Israel if they can get everybody there to be ultra-Orthodox or get them out of the country. That would improve the situation. From our point of view, Israel needs a good military, they need a good high-tech sector, they need good doctors. They don't need a large number of these ultra-Orthodox schnorrers who are just living off the public till. But they believe that that's the only way to save Israel, and that if the majority of the Israelis continue not to observe the commandments as they interpret them, then God will eventually punish Israel. So so Minya is reflecting, I think, most ultra-Orthodox opinion. I don't know, but I would think so. Pam.
What's a schnorrer?
Schnorrer is somebody who
lives off of something else,
Right.
something else.
So
Okay,
Like a
someone,
parasite.
can I
Like-
come
Almost
to
like a
dinner
parasite.
every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday? And I'll bring you something, some bottle of wine, next month.
Okay,
So, a schnorrer doesn't want to pull their own weight. But it
No,
depends
that's why I
what's
said
the
parasite.
important contribution here. For the ultra-Orthodox, it is fidelity to God as they understand it in the mitzvot. But they don't understand anything about how the Bible developed. I mean, they believe stuff that's just very simplistic and not true about the Bible. And they have to believe that in order to keep their theology going, but their beliefs are demonstrably false. So they also can't allow their people to go to college and study literature and study theology and philosophy, because then their people will understand that what their rabbis are teaching them is wrong. And then the whole thing falls apart. So what they believe is just not sustainable. It's not true, and you can show that it's not true. But if they keep them all sheltered, then they can keep telling them whatever they want. Yes, Minion,
I know it's a little off topic, but
that's okay.
I just feel that the Israelites, no, I won't call them Israelites now. The people who are the Torah people, the Torah people who listen to the people who were praying. I know I got thrown off by the phone ringing, but my question really is, do they understand that where they live, they could at any time be attacked by anybody? And that if they're all busy studying, where's the military? They're gone.
Well,
So
but
what
they
happens to
believe
the
that
country?
ultimately what's important is that if you do the mitzvot, God will protect you. And if God doesn't protect you, God doesn't want to, and you have to accept that God works in mysterious ways, and it's not for you to question. So if God wants to kill a bunch of ultra-Orthodox Jews in the Holocaust, God must have had a reason for that. But their main reason for the Holocaust is that God was punishing the children of Israel for not observing the commandment. And they punished some of the good people with the bad people because all of Israel is responsible for one another, which is why the ultra-Orthodox feel they have to try to impose their beliefs and practices on everyone in the country, because what the secular Jews do has implications for them as well as for the secular Jews. God may come and kill everybody, or almost everybody, because of the sins of the reform. So you have to you get rid of the reform before God gets rid of everybody. Yes, Marcia.
they thought ahead of to the point that if it weren't for these other people actually supporting their lifestyle of prayer and dedication, etc., they would have no food or shelter or whatever they have. I mean, they are being supported by the they're under welfare programs, right? Generally, they don't work, most of them.
That's what Rav Kook came along. Rabbi Kook, who's considered a very important Israeli thinker, and Rav Kook came out of sort of an ultra-Orthodox-ish, more or less, background, but he became known as the father of religious Zionism, a more modern approach. And he said that God is working through the secular Israelis, the early kibbutzniks, that they have helped bring the children of Israel back to the land and helped bring about a situation where the Jews can re-embrace Torah. So God is working through the sinners, and therefore the sinners, meaning the secular kibbutz types, are serving a very valuable purpose. So they were the first ones to set. There was always an old yeshuv in Israel. There was always a small group of ultra-Orthodox who lived there. There were always, even when the Crusaders killed most of them, there were still a few. And so, and there were, but in the late 19th century, the secular socialist Zionists went from Russia to Israel, and they started draining swamps and building kibbutzes, and many of them died of malaria and stuff. And they were extremely dedicated. And but most of the old yeshuvs said they are not fulfilling the role of the Am Segula, which is to study Torah and do mitzvot and wait for God to bring the Messiah. So then when God wants to, God will bring the Messiah, and then all the Jews can come back to Israel. They're trying to rush God by doing it themselves. And this is an affront to God. And Rabbi Cook said, no, they are God's, God is working through them, and you don't have a Messiah and bring everyone back to Israel in one go. There won't be enough apartments. So thank you for laughing, Marcia, and thank you for smiling. So therefore the secular is kibbutzniks, who were very not Orthodox, right? They didn't practice anything. They mostly, I guess, came from, traditional backgrounds, but they gave it all up. And Rav Kook said they're the messengers of God. God is working through them to help bring Messiah, and to fulfill this whole relationship of God wanting the Am Segula, the chosen people, the treasured people, to come back to their land. So there's different thinking about this, but if you're ultra-Orthodox, they did not accept Rav Kook's thinking, and they never felt the secular Israeli government was legitimate. And today, they're one third of that coalition fighting against democracy in Israel. You have the ultra-Orthodox, who are anti-Zionist. You have the settlers, who are ultra-Zionist. And you have the lower class Mizrahi voters, who are just, not educated and resentful about Western values. So this is a charming group of three, that the three different groups, very different groups, but they all have a lot in common in that they want to change the country and get rid of the elites. But the elites are the people that run the army and run the medical establishment, run the military establishment, run the high-tech establishment. All of these elites are not in any of these three groups. And all these three groups cost money. So you need somebody to earn that money and to maintain the societal structure. So it's a big problem. But they all probably emphasize this Am Segula idea much more than we do. So we as Reform Jews, we accept this, we embrace this, but it's not probably, how many people here in services feel that this is a strongly stressed point in our services or in my sermons? But it is mentioned, right? We do the Torah blessings and so forth, but I guess I don't really talk about this concept very much. But I don't reject it either. It's kind of implicit in some of my sermons. Yes, Pam.
These episodes we've had in the last couple of years of people going into synagogues and just start shooting people. And I was wondering, do you think there's a chance that these assassins are thinking, well, they think they're the chosen people, and I'm going to go in and...
They say so. They say so.
Sorry.
I said they say so. Yeah.
Right. If you're resentful and you're not successful, and you see the Jews being very successful, and you believe the Jews are talking about how God favors them, that can fuel your resentment. Sure. Marcia.
Well, part of the problem, I think, in the United States, anyhow, I guess internationally, Jewish people tend to be maybe this is just my opinion, they tend to look to be educated, and they are more educated than the norm of people across the board. And so they wind up in positions of administration and power, whether it's government or business. And then people who are not as well educated wind up being jealous of them and pick up this phrase from the Bible, that because they're reading the Bible and they're saying, aha, the Jews, they consider themselves chosen, and they start using that as their mantra to put Jews down. And that's why, I mean, you're talking about Charlottesville and here and there, it's just pervasive. It's scary, pervasive, you know?
Evelyn or Riva?
Yeah, I think in Charlottesville, you know, the phrase they were saying, among others, was Jews will not replace us. I think it's common that groups that are close to the bottom in the social hierarchy tend to kick those people below them because they want to have somebody who they can say are, you know, beneath them in some way. The other issue I have with this topic is that it suggests that that people who suffer, it's their fault. And for me, that's blaming the victim. I mean, the reality for so many of us is we realize that people have suffered over time, from the Holocaust, from diseases, from whatever. And it's not because they were bad people in any way.
But there is a theology that you are a bad person if you suffer, that God rewards the good and punishes the evil or the bad. And so there is a thinking like that. I think Riva and myself would both reject that thinking, right? So someone who has something, and I come across this in my work, right? So I'll talk to people who are members of our temple or not, and they'll say, you know, I was diagnosed with these 3 serious conditions, one after the other. God is punishing me. And I'm trying to figure out why. And I said, well, maybe, you know, there's just a system where cells mutate and genes are defective, and there's a certain randomness to the universe that is deliberate, you know, that this is the way, you know, there has to be some way for people to die, otherwise we'll have tremendous overpopulation. But it may not be that God hates you, it's just a random process, and it's unfortunate, but it's not God. But those type of people I'm never able to convince them, because they believe deep down from something they learned as children, maybe from their parents, that when bad things happen, it's God punishing you. And nothing I say, I could talk till I'm literally pink in the face and it won't make any difference.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have to, different people have different beliefs, but I've been pretty fortunate in my life in different ways, and I don't really attribute that to God. I attribute it mostly to luck and good genes, I suppose, relatively good genes.
Well, or lifestyle. You know, people will blatantly abuse their bodies by neglecting their health, eating improper foods, not, you know, the usual exercise, the usual bromides that we are taught that will help sustain us to live better a little bit longer, when none of us are going to get out of this life alive, shall we say. And yet at the same time, I think it is possible, by taking care of oneself, one can hopefully live longer. As you say, genetic predisposition and other factors are also have to be factored into what happens to us in our lives. But at the same time, I think the individual has to take a certain responsibility, even if you do come down with an ailment. If it is possible for modern medicine to help you, then take advantage of it. So it's a combination of many things. And so to blame God and say that because that individual didn't obey all of God's tenets, that's why that individual is being punished. This is difficult to accept as such.
But that's why it's so frustrating to watch what's going on in Israel, because if this coalition, which includes a large part, the ultra-Orthodox, if they bring total destruction to Israel, they're going to turn around and say Israel was hurt because of the sins of the non-ultra-Orthodox. So that they're going to do damage and then blame us. Because theologically they cannot be blamed because they're perfect. They're doing what God says. So if God is angry, it's with others, and they're not gonna, so there's a certain lack of accountability. And they also don't believe necessarily in following the laws. So some of their leaders are accused of corruption. I mean, not that they're the only ones in Israel that are accused of corruption. Netanyahu is not Orthodox at all. And his own corruption challenges, but they don't see cheating the secular authorities as a crime, which is a problem as well. Marcia.
How do the ultra Orthodox have such a strong hold in Knesset? I mean, are they popular wise, are they that large a contingency? Or I don't understand how they have so many votes. I know they do have.
Well, the coalition, government system there is based upon, building a coalition of at least 61. And so you don't have to have a large number to play an important role in the coalition.
So it isn't by a democratic vote of, a majority, you're saying, really. Well, it doesn't, I just don't understand. I don't think the ultra Orthodox are a majority in Israel, are they?
No, but let's say the Likud gets 35 seats and the centrists, Benny Gantz and Lapid gets 35. So in order to get into the government, they have to form 61.
How many is the total?
120.
Okay.
So they then have to go to various smaller parties. So
What makes them that powerful? Why do the subgroups want to come and join them? I mean,
the Likud can't go to the other bloc because they want policies the other bloc doesn't approve of. So they have to go to the smaller parties. And Likud couldn't go to some of the smaller parties. For example, the party led by Avigdor Lieberman, who's Russian, not because of anything in policy, but because Netanyahu lied to Lieberman maybe more than once, and Lieberman totally detests Netanyahu. So Lieberman said, I will never go into government with Netanyahu because he's a horrible person. So that left the settler party, and it left the anti-homosexual party, and it left the ultra-Orthodox parties, which is more than one, and and so forth. So Netanyahu was able to make deals with these, several parties, gave them a lot of stuff in exchange for forming a coalition. He was able to get 64 seats out of 120, which in Israel is a very large coalition. As long as he can keep this together, he can stay for 4 years. So he has to give in to these guys more or less, because otherwise the coalition can fall apart. Now, these guys also don't want it to fall apart because they're getting unprecedented power and money as a result. I mean, if you're the head of a cabinet position, it comes with hundreds and hundreds of millions of shekels. that you can send to your party loyalists and you can spend on your pet projects. However, some of these guys are so extreme that if Netanyahu acts even somewhat moderately, they might say, we're out of here. And Netanyahu knows if there's a new election, he's going to get slaughtered because of what's happened. So everybody in the government has a vested interest in keeping this government together for the full 4 years because they know they may never come back into power again for a long, long time.
What's
On the
going on? I mean, it's kind of died down what we see on our news, you know, there's no rioting, so we don't hear much, you know.
Yes, so that's true. Pam.
Well, if Israel self-destructs to a large degree and the whole, their whole system falls apart, does Israel realize that this is going to affect Judaism all over the world if they, end up just being a contentious, place of Judaism?
Well, the ultra-Orthodox don't care. They care. They want that. They want to destroy all non-Orthodox Judaism. That's very important to them.
Yeah.
They don't believe any of the other forms of Judaism are valid, and in fact that it's an affront to God.
They don't see the bigger picture there?
No, they totally disagree with the bigger picture. They're against it. They want to destroy it.
Hmm.
And in fact, the current government is withholding all the funds that previously went to reform institutions, which wasn't much, but it was something. So they're doing an emergency fundraising to try to keep the reform movement in Israel going. And that may require 4 years worth because this government may stay in power a long time. They're also taking money away from the Arab sector. So it's in Israel's interest to give some money to the Israeli Arabs to integrate them, because if you're integrated, then you're at least partially connected to the system. And certainly I found in my travel in Israel there's a lot of different kinds of Arabs in Israel. Some of them are quite happy in the state and some of them are very hostile. But you want to keep the happy ones happy and you want to try to win over the hostile ones a little bit, or maybe not, but you certainly don't want to take away all the things that make the happy ones happy. So then the hostile ones will say, you see, we were right all along. The Israelis were going to hurt us. So you don't want to do that. And so, we want to be an Am Segula. Israel, specifically, Ben Gurion talked about it in a secular sense. Israel wants to be a light to the nations in terms of helping, poor countries elsewhere and doing all sorts of things that were considered a model of behavior for a country. And they've largely tried to do that, So, but that may stop now, because this group sees that. So you could see what's happening in Israel as a debate over this one concept. What is being an Am Segula? And the ultra-Orthodox say it's one thing, and the non-Orthodox say it's something else. Evelyn.
I'm curious if these Orthodox groups rely on the government to subsidize them. All of the people who are considered non-Orthodox are the wage earners paying in the taxes to help subsidize these groups. I don't understand if they wish the destruction of these non-Orthodox groups, where's the money going to come from? Who is going to subsidize them? Don't they see that?
No.
Yeah, there's a short circuit there. They've cut it off.
Well,
In a word,
I guess
no.
they're figuring they can be more aggressive, and these groups will always be there. Now, those groups are threatening not to serve in the army and
Right,
not to, and leaving the country, but the ultra-Orthodox thinks it's largely a bluff. That now it may be a bluff because if large numbers of secular Israelis and the high-tech people, the rich people actually leave the country permanently, you're going to see a tremendous decline in the cost of apartments, which are exorbitant. I have not seen very much of a dip, a little bit. But if the average apartment in Tel Aviv goes for at least $1 million for a little apartment, if it drops down to 400,000, you know that a lot of seculars, I mean, that would be good for those who might want to buy an apartment there, but it'd be bad for the country because it'll show that a real lot of secular Israelis have actually left. But I don't see that certainly has not happened yet. So the ultra-Orthodox are, playing, they're just betting they can push harder and nothing major will happen. If most of the reservists permanently stop serving in the military, then the ultra-Orthodox rabbis may tell their ultra-Orthodox politicians to start shutting up because they said we pushed a little too far, and if we push any further, the whole system may collapse. So it's maybe a political strategy just to push a little bit.
Yeah,
And
but there is that tipping point where it may not be retrievable beyond a
Right,
certain
right.
point.
So they're betting they can stop well before the tipping point. Riva,
Yeah, one
Shirley,
thing-
Richard,
yeah.
Riva.
One thing I'm aware of, both in the United States and areas like New York, Williamsburg, and Israel, is that the Orthodox or the ultra-Orthodox vote very tightly as a bloc. And that gives them much, much more clout. And that's guided by the rabbis who tell their people or community or shul or whatever how to vote. And they all vote the same way. And that gives them a lot of additional power.
Right, I tell my congregation how to vote before every election, and every one of my congregants votes the way I tell them to.
Sure they do.
Dream on, dream on.
And it's also a problem, in New York, there've been issues around parochial Hebrew religious schools, day schools, not really meeting academic standards, the New York State academic standards. And the Orthodox have been able to evade that for many, many years, just because of their strength in voting.
Right, they do in New York State, a similar thing to what they do in the state of Israel. So if you want to become governor, you have to get the police and the firemen and the teachers and the ultra-Orthodox to support you. So you get, or to be mayor of New York City, especially. So to be mayor of New York City, you promise the firemen a very good contract. So that's why you can retire as a fireman and you make $200,000 a year. And that's why the ultra-Orthodox get all sorts of benefits for their system. It's basically a cheap and easy way for a politician to get elected, because giving the ultra-Orthodox stuff doesn't really offend anyone. Like if you promise an anti-abortion group a strict anti-abortion policy, everyone who believes that abortion should be accessible is going to get mad. If you give a few $100 million more to the ultra-Orthodox, or promise them that they can do what they want in their schools, the Puerto Ricans aren't going to care. The whatever other groups aren't going to care. So it's easy enough to do. And in Israel, that's how it ran for decades. Politicians gave the ultra-Orthodox money and exempted them from the army, and other groups didn't really care too much. But now the ultra-Orthodox are pushing with these other groups together in a way that is threatening the lifestyles of everyone else. So there are people threatening that when we get power back, we're gonna retaliate against you. We're gonna cut off all your subsidies, and we're gonna cut off all your army exemptions. And there definitely will be people who want to do that. They're probably gonna be told, shut up, because we need their cooperation. And we're just going to go back to the way it was, and we're going to give them plenty of money and let them not go to the army, but we're not going to let them impose on us. but there are going to be people that want to push the other direction. And I always felt that that this was created, that at the beginning, Ben-Gurion should not have given in to them, but, he had to, he's trying to create a country. The ultra-Orthodox were threatening to go to the UN and testify against the creation of state, which, there were a lot of people, including in the US government. Truman barely supported the creation of state of Israel. It was just barely that they convinced. The State Department was very much against it. Truman himself was kind of iffy. And they got his former business partner to go in and see him and give a pitch. And they kept the ultra-Orthodox quiet. And they figured out how to neutralize the State Department a little bit. So the Israelis were able to get Truman to support but then once Truman supported it, he put a weapons embargo on Israel at the request of the State Department. So things were very iffy. So Ben-Gurion didn't feel that he could go against the ultra-Orthodox. So he gave them what they wanted, and then over the course of time, they got more and more. But this comes directly back to this Am Segula approach. Let's read one little more, and then we conclude for the day. Minya? Other rabbinic commentaries in the middle of 133 left.
Oh, I marked that. Other rabbinic commentators, however, define the relationship with a sense of humor as one of mutual desperation. God and Israel treasure each other and love each other because they cannot do otherwise. These interpreters argue that at precisely the time Israel is wandering on the Sinai desert, God is searching for a people to accept the Torah. Each of the great nations of the world is asked if they will take the Torah, and each refuses, saying that the Torah's teachings are not suitable or compatible with its beliefs and culture. Finally, say these rabbis, God sees the tattered and desperate Israelites making their way across the desert. Lifting Mount Sinai over their heads, God asks threateningly, "Will you accept my Torah or be buried by this mountain?" Seeing that they have no choice, if they wish to live, the Israelites respond, "It is a tree of life to all who grasp it." For these rabbis, the Israelites choose life by choosing the Torah. It is a desperate choice of a desperate people, singled out by a desperate God. God requires an An Segula, a treasured people, not for special favors, but for a special burden. They are to be responsible for carrying the Torah and its commandments on into the world. The survival of the world and all within it depends upon the truths of Torah and the loyalty of those who carry out its ethical and ritual commandments. Israel is beloved by God when it chooses to be God's partner and when it lives by Torah. To the extent that they choose to live by the commandments, they guarantee their survival.
So this is a rather desperate theology. We're hanging on by a thread. There's no question that Jews have had a disproportionate influence on the world. And so it rings true in part, but it doesn't promise us anything too significant. In fact, it promises nothing but misery and persecution. And periodically there'll be something good in between, but this kind of theology would go very well with the question, why would God allow the Holocaust to happen? Because from the beginning, God said, you're going to be God's chosen people for special responsibilities. You're going to have a very rough time, but if you hold on, you'll save the world, but you're going to personally pay a very, very high price. Okay, final comments, Marcia.
That's what I said in the first place. We're talking about,
Okay, so you read ahead, and so
I hadn't read it.
okay. Usually Marcia is the best prepared of us all. She reads everything and then she prepares like totally. but this time she just had nivuah, she had prophecy, she knew what was written there. Richard,
Well, if God is so strong, so powerful, so omnipotent, why is he fearful? And why couldn't he tell the others, hey, if you don't do what I do, I'm going to kill you? Because here the rabbis are saying to you Jews, you Hebrews, if you don't do what I tell you to do, you're going to be buried by a mountain. Well, did he tell that to the others?
Mhm.
And they did okay without doing it. So I'm not sure this is a true interpretation or thought. But then again, I'm very secular, so whatever the rabbis want.
And that comes from the Talmud or Talmudic literature. So this is standard rabbinic theology. I would imagine that Reva's late husband might have liked this approach. Not so much. Okay, last comments, Evelyn, Shirley, Pam, Minya, anyone? Okay, then we turn to our final blessing. And 1 o'clock, we have an outreach committee meeting today, and we're planning for October. The adult ed courses are going to have two, one on Reform Judaism and one on the crisis in Israel. So we're anticipating a lot of interest for the crisis in Israel course. And then November, we're going to do basic Hebrew prayers, which will be 4 sessions over 2 weeks, 2 of them with the cantor and myself, and 2 of them just with me. Okay. Are you ready? The blessing after Torah study. 1, 2, 3. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tocheinu Baruch Adonai noten Torah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us the teaching of truth, implanting within us eternal life. Blessed is Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen.
Amen.
Next week is justice, justice you shall pursue, which is page 139.
That was in
Parshat Shoftim.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg's book.
And tell everyone that we are back, and if somebody could check in with Charlotte to make sure that we don't have this problem next week with Zoom. Okay, have a very nice week, everyone, and Shavua Tov.
Yeah, but-
See you Friday. Bye-bye.